It's my great pleasure to introduce to you today Julian Sullivan. Julian and I were friends. We go back something like definitely 60 plus years because we were at school together. And the school that we were at together was St. Brendan's Roman Catholic Grammar School. And it's very interesting, I think, that not only we were brought up in Catholic families, and we went to Catholic grammar school together, but our paths, both our life's paths and our spiritual paths, have kind of really diverged over the years in a very, I think, in an extremely interesting way, actually. So let me introduce you to Julian. Julian, first of all, I have to ask you to make sure that you qualify for being on this video. What's your age?
My age is 70.
You qualify. Great.
Three score and 10. 3 score and 10.
Good. And where in the world do you live?
I now live in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, the Steel City.
Right. And,
wonderful industrial heartland as it was of England, and now very post-industrial, still producing lots of steel, actually, but not employing anything like as many people.
No, I'm sure.
And at the heart of some of the most beautiful countryside in the whole of the UK, the Pennine Hills, very strongly sculpted hills. It's a lovely place to be.
Yes. And I'm presuming, because of your age, that you're retired. And so, what was your work?
My work for 33 years was as an inner city vicar, or a pastor, or priest, depending how you see that particular role. All sorts of different ways you can describe it. But and in the Church of England. So rather divergent again from your introduction there, but there's a story behind that, of course. But that's what I've been doing for the last 33 or so years. Yeah.
Right. And could you tell us the story behind that?
Well, the story was, I think you will know that teenage Cat found it very difficult to hold on to what they had been given, or what had been given unasked. And I just felt that I needed to get away from it, get some perspective. So I did for 10 years or so. And then I thought in my early 20s, maybe I'd thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And so I just found that questions never went away about the big story, the meta-narrative, if you like. And those questions would not go away. And eventually, again, cutting a long story short, came back to faith, but in a much simpler way. And I found myself in a kind of nonconformist setting with some very good friends, where the Bible was taught a lot more than it had been, I think, to us as children, and where there was a very different kind of approach to faith. It may just be that I discovered a mature kind of Christian faith, which was equally available within the Catholic setup, but it just didn't happen for me. And then I felt that sense of calling that is really indefinable about serving God as in ministry, which had come to me at the age of 12, I have to say, as a Catholic, at one of our school retreats. And I was so horrified by the thought that, rather like Jonah, I definitely got on a bus going the other way and tried to do my best to escape it. All that came back, the sense of call and the sense of what I perhaps should be doing. So I taught for a few years, and then found myself training for the Anglican priesthood. And I married Veronica in 1980, and we went to Oxford, spent 3 years there training, and from then on moved straight to Southall, oddly enough, again, without being able to quantify it, the calling for me very much was about urban life and faith. Somehow grabbed me, and has done all my life, and still does. And so we started off into Southall, which was very multiracial, fabulous place, a little old railway town, which, for many years, lots of terraced houses, very crowded. And that's where the first Asian immigrants came just after the war. And so we built up this wonderful, we had Sikh neighbors, we had Muslim neighbors, we had Hindu neighbors, we had Caribbean neighbors, they were Irish. There were a few bewildered people who'd lived in Southall all their lives who weren't quite sure what was going on. But there was such a buzz with the way in which different cultures meet, and whether it's hybrid vigor or what, I don't know. But there was something in the air which really grabbed me, and I've always loved that kind of ministry since, where you are looking after a congregation, but you also are meeting lots of other people of faith. You discover something very much in common with people of faith, of different faiths. I loved that.
Yeah. And going right back to the start of that journey, what do you think was it that, you say early 20s, what do you think was it that kind of flipped you back, if you like, into that path of faith? Well, no, not faith, because, we talk about multi-faith, aren't we? Christian faith.
Well, Christian faith, really. Yes, it's very hard to say, except that I just felt something very strong was missing. Something was missing in life, and I don't know. There were one or two instances. I remember once going out in the hills somewhere in Scotland, I think, and thinking, golly, the rock I'm standing on has been here for the whole of human history, virtually, And certainly these rocks have been, as a geologist, I knew about the eons of time, in which things happen. And our little piece of life seems so short and so recent. I just felt there were some big questions that no one seemed to have an answer for. But it just things didn't quite mesh somehow. And I remember reading the scriptures. So I used to try to read them as a young person, and I never could make sense of them, really. I always gave up after about a couple of days. But I started to read the scriptures, and they began to make sense. And it was just something about the description of creation, the description of humanity, and in all its poetic way of conveying truth, if you like, that really spoke to me. And at the same time, I also had good friends, some of whom like Peter Biggs, for example, and Ian Wills, who both came to faith. And I also had other friends that didn't know Pete or Ian, a girlfriend called Diana, and various other people who also talked about their faith in the same sort of way, but very simply as followers of Christ. And my first thought was to dismiss it, because as a Catholic, you think you know it all. You've had it. You've so much had it. It no longer scintillates. It's not an exciting thing. It's just there in the air, really. But the way they spoke about it just warmed my heart, I think I have to say. And I began to seek that for myself. And so that was how I came back to a faith which was not Catholic. And in fact, I didn't know what to do with the Catholic heritage that I carried. And part of my journey over the last 40 years or so has been to integrate what was given to us in our first 7 years, the Jesuit thing, give us the boy and we'll show you the man or something. And so in a way, exploring faith from from my own starting point with God somehow enabled me to evaluate everything else that I hadn't been able to make sense of before. So somehow faith came together, and my place in the universe somehow came together. And I found a great sense of centeredness, which I probably wouldn't have called it that at the time, but a deep sense of satisfaction that here we are in the universe, we're working our way through it, we're here on Earth, there is this wonderful kind of greater story unfolding, and we're part of it. And for me, that meant a fantastic amount, actually. And I think that's something which, when you're talking about a thing 40 years on, 50 years on, of course you're reading back what you've subsequently discovered, but that is how the story looks to me from here. Yes. And I always thought, I just should say this, that when I found that, I thought, this can't last. This is too good to be true. This is going to be a phase, and I will probably end up in something else. And I never did. I've just stayed. It's just got better as the years have gone by, actually. And no one's more surprised than I am, in a way. But his life has just got rosier or richer, in both in faith and in other ways, I have to say.
Yes. Living in Southall then was with that is ecumenical the right word for multi-faith?
It could be a broader interpretation of ecumenical, because you tend to think of ecumenical as being different personalities of Christianity.
Right.
But of course, within Southall, because we had all these different cultures rubbing up against each other, it was not like a traditional English parish where you've got an awful lot of people and you're the church they don't go to, mainly.
Yes. Yes.
In this case, we didn't have many of them.
Yes.
They'd all moved away.
Yes.
Now, what we did have was a very interesting mix of people and cultures, and I think that did two things. One was it made you think about what really mattered about your own faith, because there's no room. If you're talking to a Muslim about what you believe, or you're talking to a Sikh about what you believe, and they're asking and you're saying, then you cut out a lot of cultural baggage that goes along with certainly English Christianity. You just don't bother with that. You just deal with the heart of the matter, really. And if you're listening, then you're also listening to other people who have their own convictions that come out of their own culture. And maybe 100, 150 years ago, you could have said, golly, all those heathens over there in Africa or India or wherever it was, when they live next door on the same street, you don't think of it like that. You can't think of it like that. And when we met such generosity and warmth from particularly Asian hospitality. I mean, we had Sikhs down the road who would come round one evening and say, look, we've made too much food. We'd like to give you some, and you'd get this wonderful curried goat or something would come through with all the, cucumber raita and wonderful other mixes of things. And Southall, funnily enough, was also a musical centre. And a lot of North Indian classical music came from Southall. And I discovered this when I was at college at Kingston Polytechnic, as it was then. And we used to have these concerts, music concerts at the Art College. And I was the secretary of the Music Society for a bit. And we used to pay these musicians who came over, we paid their taxi fare. And the taxi fare was always from Southall. And which I didn't know at all then, but they had some of the finest exponents of North Indian classical music in Southall. And
very nice, very nice,
very rich, very rich. And
very nice
dancing and all of the whole thing. It's just quite brilliant.
So how did you end up at Sheffield then? If you started at Southall, is Southall a suburb of London?
Yes, it's Middlesex actually. Going out west from London, you go. I can't remember all the things, but there's Acton, there's Shepherd's Bush. If you're going to the middle of town, you come to East Acton, then you come to Ealing. Eventually, going along the Great West Road, or not the A40, A40, you come to Southall, and all these little towns are on the way out there. So that's where, it's not quite on the tube. You just have to get a train, I think.
Yeah.
Get into town.
So what happened after Southall? What took you to Sheffield?
Well, Southall was a very specialised kind of ministry. And I didn't have anything like the experience of my contemporaries, who were all in fairly different varieties of English parish. And the issues they seemed to deal with didn't interest me in the slightest. And when it came to move, I therefore felt a little bit like I didn't understand the whole of the English parish system, or how that kind of integrated way of being in a community. I wasn't quite sure how that worked. And of course, when you do that sort of job, you're in danger of getting typecast. So they think, oh yes, here's a chap. Right, well, we'd like you to go to Wembley next, or whatever it was. And I thought I didn't want to do that. So I headed into the West Country to a little cathedral city known as Wells in Somerset, which you may remember now.
I didn't know you were at Wells.
Yeah.
Did I know you were at Wells? I'm not sure.
What?
Did I know that you were at Wells?
Yes, you did, because your then parents-in-law.
That's right.
There.
That's right.
And I can't remember whether we met during the time I was there, but I knew them. Lancashire.
That's right.
David Lancashire.
That's right.
Yeah.
David and Heather Lancashire.
Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
So spent 3 years there.
Very different, very, very different to Southall.
Exactly, and that's what I felt I needed, because it's just a totally different dynamic, you know.
How would you? Sorry to interrupt. How would you describe Wells to somebody who doesn't know it? Because you describe Southall very well. How would you describe Wells in contrast to the Southall?
Well, in many ways, it's a classic, traditional little English community, really, English city with a cathedral in it, sitting in a beautiful little basin, really, with the Mendip Hills on one side, and then on the other side, stretching away the Somerset levels, going all the way to Glastonbury. Glastonbury is another place, very interesting, with the festival and everything. A lot of people came there to retire, but a lot of people had lived there all their lives, and in some ways it felt like the 60s just hadn't got across the Mendips. And Wells was wonderfully in this, not exactly a time warp, but it certainly felt like a different age there. Very Anglo-Saxon, very conservative in some ways, or Lib Dem probably politically, but it couldn't have been more different. When we arrived, to give you an idea of the contrast, we thought, we'd settled into the house, and I thought, right, come on, we'll go out and get a meal. We went out to the Indian restaurant in the high street and ordered some sort of chicken korma or something like that. And it couldn't have been more bland. We were so used to highly spiced food, and believe me, that's
I think that says it all, Jules. That says it all.
I did find wonderfully gifted people there, and lovely people. And we made some good friends, and we're still in touch with them. I mean, we've kept in touch with people wherever we've been. But Wales, very special, and I've got very warm. And that's where our children grew up. Well, they didn't grow up. They had a few years there. Actually, Luke was 4 when we left, I think, and Ollie was possibly 2 when we left to come to Sheffield. But it's very beautiful. There's something in the air that I love about Somerset. It's also slightly soporific. It didn't feel like a great edge. And at my age, at that time, I was kind of raring to go.
Oh, so what sort of age? Sorry, what sort of age were you?
I would have been 36, 37 when we were there, I think.
Right.
Because that would be about, yes, because I left when I was 40, so I must have gone there when I was 37. We spent 3 years there, having spent 4 years in Southall, and it was very beautiful. The levels were fabulous. We used to go cycling on the levels. We had a little farm. You could buy cider. We picnicked on in the fields there, and you could take a trip across to Glastonbury and beyond. And it was just the Quantock Hills were only an hour away. It's a fabulous part of the world, very beautiful, and very rural. I've described itself as a rural city, actually, which is quite.
Yes. Again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm keeping half an eye on the time because in theory we've only got about half an hour in total. So we're approaching the end. I'll
tell you about Sheffield, shall I?
What happened after Wells?
So what happened was Wells, it confirmed for me that my place was in a city for ministry. I needed to be there. I had very strong drive to be in the city. So when it came to time to move, and we weren't intending to stay there long, I thought, well, I've learned the lesson. I've got a grip on the wider church, and I really did. I had a great guy to work with there, great vicar called Ken Davis, a bit of a legend in his own lunchtime sort of thing, and learned a fantastic amount from him. But then started looking. And out of the blue came an invitation from the Bishop of Sheffield to come up here. The letter said something like, I've read your papers, because when you're looking for a move, you put your papers out and everybody reads them. He said, I've read what you say, and I have a strong feeling you should be working in Sheffield. Come and have a look at this or that or the other thing. So we did, and this was after having looked everywhere and found nothing. This just felt like home. Walked into it and just thought, this is it. And we've stayed ever since. We've stayed here. We came in 1990, so that's 30 years ago. And for 26 years, I was vicar of St Mary's, Bramall Lane, next to Sheffield United, right in S1, right in the middle of town, just where I wanted to be.
What strikes me, I think, is what a wonderfully blessed life you've actually led. Incredibly full in every way, both sort of spiritually and also humanly, if you like. Okay, very quickly, I just in case, I'm not sure about the technology here. Have you got words of comfort for people who have suffered we all suffered, but who have greatly suffered because of the pandemic and because of the virus?
Would you want me to read something, or do you want me to do that first, say the thing?
Up to you.
Like
up to you.
I'll tell you why, because the thing I read, I thought I would read, actually is a very good way into what I thought I might say, very briefly.
Go for it. Do
we do that?
Go for it.
It's a poem by Edward Thomas. I don't know if you know his stuff. You will know some of it, and I'm pretty sure you'll know this because it's a poem by Edward Thomas called Adlestrop.
Oh, I know it.
Adlestrop, which you will know, and we would have learnt this at school. You would have been probably in the same English class where we read this, and I find it it's just stayed with me. You know, certain things that become travellers along the journey, really. And this poem does, and it seems particularly prescient. I think maybe prescient's the right word for this time that we are in. And I thought I'd just read it and then maybe give a little reflection, if that's all right. Does that sound okay?
Please, please.
Yes, I remember Adlestrop, the name, because one afternoon of heat, the express train drew up there unwontedly. It was late June. The steam hissed. Someone cleared his throat. No one left, and no one came on that bare platform. What I saw was Adlestrop, only the name. And willows, willow herb, and grass, and meadowsweet, and haycocks dry. No whit less still and lonely fair than the high cloudlets in the sky. And for that minute, a blackbird sang close by, and around him, mistier, farther and farther, all the birds of Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. Adlestrop, Edward Thomas. And the reflection was simply this, that train travel at that time was a fairly noisy affair. The sound of the engine, the steam hissing, all the things that he describes. But the train drew up in the station and there was this wonderful silence. And I experienced something like that traveling by train when I was very young. I remember a similar kind of thing. And I think the poem conjured that up for me, and it has always stayed. And it's that little moment of silence in the midst of rush, journeying. And he describes it perfectly, the stillness of the platform. No one comes, no one goes anywhere, nothing happens. And then, in the stillness, he hears birdsong. He hears the blackbird singing. And that's so wonderfully evocative of the English countryside. And he notices all the haycock sweet and all the meadow sweet, all the different things that he notices there. Suddenly, they're things he wouldn't have seen if the train hadn't stopped, if there hadn't been that moment of quiet. And I was thinking around the whole COVID-19, our experience of lockdown, and the train has stopped. It just unbelievably stopped. And there's no sound of machinery. There really isn't. We don't hear any cars. We're breathing air, possibly more freshly than we have done for many, many years. Certainly for us in our lives, we lived in the inner city where it was pretty grotty air. Here it's clear as anything. Stillness. And then you hear, well, in our garden, we have a song thrush that every morning comes and sings at the top of a tree. And the sound goes out everywhere. And there's a whole family of birds that circulate in our garden and the gardens around us. And yesterday I was listening to the clearest blackbird that I've heard in years. And when things go still like this, it gives time for other things to come to the surface. They're always there, but you don't always notice them. And for me, that's been very special in the stillness. And thinking about life in general, when there are so many distractions, and we're used to very distracted lives, and somehow these last few months, for me, have been ones where it's been possible to be more centered and perhaps more still than I have been before. And I would only want to say that, by way of comfort, that these are kind of, this is a universal quality that's come into our lives. And whatever state we're in, one feels particularly for people who are locked in but don't have access to a garden, who have children, where lockdown is anything but peaceful, actually. We know there are people who are grieving in the most unsatisfactory way because they've lost loved ones through this illness, but have not been able to have a proper funeral. It's all been distanced. Or maybe they couldn't be there when their loved one was dying. But these are very, very hard things. What they can do, what is there for us, is to lift our eyes away. And we can do this in any state. I know I've had to do it when I was very ill. I very nearly died at one point, around my 50s. And I just remember that rather than it being an anxious time, it was a time when my imagination ran wild. And I remember being just lifting out of the ordinary at that time. And these unprecedented times, as everybody says, give us that opportunity to think again about our lives, about where we are in the scheme of things, if you like, and to perhaps think about things that haven't come into our minds for a long time because we've been busy. What is our purpose here on earth? What are the things that people find most satisfying? And of course, it helps us to value, perhaps above all, the people that we have around us, and especially our families that we are separated from. We can speak to them on a screen, but we haven't seen our boys and their families for 2-3 months now. It's been a long time, and that's not always the easiest thing. We value the people around us. We value the neighbours that we don't see as much as we normally would. And when we do meet in the street, having a little chat across the street is really great. Excuse me. So I think it's almost like a process of filtration, and things can settle and sink in this filtration tank. And what do we find when that happens? And that's different for everyone, but therefore it's a time of kind of exploration, if we can have, and it might take courage to do this. I'm not suggesting it's necessarily easy, but to allow, as our thoughts settle, to really focus on what matters to us, what's most important. Somebody asked me that when I was ill, someone who'd been through a similar experience. They said, well, what was it like? I said, first of all, I felt I was in God's hands. I had to say, Lord, into your hands I commit my spirit. I think we do that when we grieve. I think we do that when we suffer in all sorts of ways. We want to be able to say something like that. Into your hands, O Lord, I commit my spirit. And then what becomes important? Your closest loved ones, whoever they are, your family, dearest, oldest friends, things like that, really, really matter. And those things, and all the other stuff that you worried about day by day, just isn't there. It just goes. I let go the whole lot. And my friend thought for a minute. He said, snap. Because he had exactly the same kind of experience. And we'll all express that differently. But I think that's I don't know if it's a word of comfort. It's just a thought.
It is. It's lovely. It's lovely.
At this time, really. I'll leave that with you. But especially this thing of being able to say, come what may, I put my life in God's hands. And for some that might mean, well, what on earth are you talking about? It may be an exploration. But now's the time maybe to explore that afresh.
Yes. Yeah. So Julian Sullivan, thank you very, very much for your words of comfort and your reading of that wonderful poem.
Thank you. Thank you, Swithin, for asking me to be part of it. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Yeah.